60 million years ago, in the suffocating heat of the Columbian Paleocene, a pregnant predator the length of a school bus navigates a murky swamp. She weighs over 2,500 pounds. This is the Titanoboa, the undisputed apex predator of her era. Now, she's ready to give birth. How does a monster of this scale reproduce? Does she crawl onto a muddy bank to lay a clutch of massive leathery eggs? Or does the water suddenly boil with dozens of fully formed 6-foot-long killers born alive? To figure out how Titanoboa reproduced, we have to strip away Hollywood myths and look at hard squamate biology. Anatomy dictates destiny, and Titanoboa sarahonensis is not a python. It belongs to the family of Boidae. It is a true boa. This single taxonomic fact is the biggest clue we have. In the modern snake world, reproduction splits into two massive camps. There's oviparity and viviparity. Pythons lay eggs. They deposit massive clutches on land, coil around them, and generate heat through muscle spasms. Boas do the exact opposite. They almost universally give birth to live young. Because Titanoboa is deeply nested in the boid lineage, directly related to modern anacondas, paleontologists strongly agree it was ovoviviparous. Live birth in reptiles is usually an evolutionary response to freezing temperatures, allowing mothers to act as mobile incubators. But Titanoboa did not live in a cold climate. It lived in a prehistoric rainforest so hot it pushed the absolute limits of reptilian metabolism. Mean annual temperatures sat around 90 degrees Fahrenheit and near total humidity. The ground was literally a preheated incubator, so why wouldn't Titanoboa just lay eggs? The answer comes down to gravity and sheer physics. Titanoboa was vastly too heavy to be a terrestrial snake. At nearly 50 feet long and weighing well over a ton, moving on dry land was a grueling, crushing effort. The intense friction and the sheer weight of its own musculature meant Titanoboa was strictly an aquatic ambush predator. It lived in deep, slow-moving river systems, exactly like the modern green anaconda. Furthermore, leaving eggs on the ground in the Sarahon ecosystem was a guaranteed death sentence. These swamps were swarming with massive apex predators. Giant crocodilians like Sarahonasuchus patrolled the exact same waters. A nest of Titanoboa eggs would be an undefended, protein-dense buffet for scavengers. By keeping the embryos inside her body, a female Titanoboa eliminated the vulnerability of a static terrestrial nest. She remained submerged and weightless. She could actively hunt or defend herself while carrying her young. Her massive 1-ton body became a heavily armored, impenetrable fortress for the developing snakes. So what did a Titanoboa birth actually look like? To reconstruct this biological event, we scale up the biology of the green anaconda. Anacondas have a gestation period of roughly 6 to 7 months. Given the immense volume of the pregnant Titanoboa, gestation would likely stretch to 8 or 9 months. This time frame was dictated by the ambient water temperature and the raw metabolic rate required to form dozens of massive embryos. During these months, the female became exponentially thicker. Her lower third expanded dramatically as the internal yolk sacs swelled. When the time finally came to give birth, she likely sought out shallow, heavily vegetated backwaters. Giving birth directly in the water provided immediate buoyancy for the neonates. It completely eliminated the crushing friction of pushing them onto a muddy bank. This brings us to the hardest biological question. Exactly how many babies did she have? In modern snakes, litter size directly correlates to the physical mass of the mother. A large green anaconda can drop 40, 60, or even up to 80 live young in a single rapid event. The absolute record maximum for a modern anaconda sits near 100 neonates. Titanoboa was roughly 3 times the length and 5 times the mass of the largest anaconda on record. Evolutionary biology dictates a strict trade-off between quantity and quality. An animal can either produce hundreds of tiny, highly vulnerable offspring, or few, massive offspring instantly capable of dominating their ecosystem. Based on Boyd reproductive strategies, scientists estimate a female Titanoboa likely gave birth to anywhere from 60 to over 100 neonates. The sheer biological mass expelled during this single event is staggering. A modern anaconda giving birth to 40 babies loses up to half her total body weight. A female Titanoboa pushing out 80 massive babies would expel hundreds of pounds of raw biological material directly into the water. These were not helpless little worms. A newborn green anaconda measures roughly 2 feet long. Scaling up the anatomical proportions, a newborn Titanoboa likely measured between 4 and 6 feet long the exact second it hit the water. Imagine a litter of 80 snakes. Each one is the size of a fully grown modern boa constrictor. They are all unleashed into the swamp at the exact same moment. They were born sealed inside clear amniotic sacs. They were entirely independent, within seconds of leaving their mother's cloaca. The neonate violently thrashes. It tears through the membrane to take its first breath of dense, humid Paleocene air. From the second they broke their amniotic sacs, the 6-foot neonates were on their own. They possessed perfectly formed recurved teeth. They were born with the immediate, hardwired instinct to kill. Their very first meals were likely large fish, prehistoric amphibians, and the vulnerable juveniles of the giant turtles and crocodilians sharing the same swamps. Despite being born the size of modern adult snakes, their early life was incredibly brutal. The Sarahan swamps were highly competitive. The mortality rate for these massive neonates was exceptionally high. Out of a litter of 80, perhaps only 2 or 3 survived the decades required to reach the colossal 40-foot, 1-ton adult stage. They were likely picked off by giant turtles like Carbonemes, a beast with a shell the size of a dining table and jaws capable of snapping a juvenile snake in half. They were eaten by adult crocodilians. They were very likely cannibalized by slightly older, larger Titanoboas. In the snake world, a smaller snake is simply another meal. Let's break down the mechanics of the birthing process itself. For the first few months of gestation, a female Titanoboa probably stopped eating completely. Her stomach would have shrunk. Her entire metabolism shifted aggressively toward embryonic development. She became a massive, slow-moving submarine. She relied heavily on dark waters and natural camouflage to avoid being harassed by large predatory crocodilians. When labor finally began, it was driven by rhythmic, rippling muscle contractions traveling down her massive spine. These contractions were powered by thousands of individual vertebrae and highly flexible rib pairs. They systematically pushed the heavy neonates toward the cloaca. Mammalian birth is relatively fast. A Titanoboa expelling up to 100 massive offspring would be locked in heavy labor for days. It was a prolonged, physically exhausting ordeal. Once the exhaustive process was complete, the mother was a deflated shadow of her former self. Her skin would have hung dramatically loose. Her internal fat reserves were completely drained. She needed to hunt immediately, and she may have just targeted the largest prey available in the immediate vicinity, like a massive crocodilian or a giant lungfish, just to shock her dormant digestive system back into action. Meanwhile, the neonates scattered into the darkest parts of the swamp. Their growth rate was tied directly to the temperature of the water. Reptiles are ectothermic. Their metabolism and physical growth are entirely dictated by ambient environmental heat. The extreme 90-degree heat of the Paleocene meant these snakes were supercharged from day one. A 6-foot neonate hunting constantly in boiling hot water packed on mass at a terrifying speed. They likely reached 20 feet in length within their very first few years. They quickly graduated from eating small fish to ambushing large crocodilians. If we look at the skull structure of Titanoboa, it reveals exactly how these babies hunted. Titanoboa had highly specialized, backward curving teeth. In adult specimens, these teeth were heavily adapted for grabbing and holding onto large, slippery prey like fish and crocodiles, pinning them down before constriction began. The babies would have possessed miniature, razor-sharp versions of this exact same dental architecture. A 6-foot neonate would launch out of the mud, sinking dozens of recurved teeth into a prehistoric lungfish, wrapping its muscular coils around the prey and slowly suffocating it. Even at day one, their biological engineering would have been flawless. We also have to look at the massive genetic diversity of a single Titanoboa litter. Female snakes of many boid species practice multiple paternity. A single female mates with several different males during the breeding season. She then stores their sperm internally for months. When she finally ovulates, the massive batch of eggs is fertilized by sperm from multiple different fathers. A single litter of 80 Titanoboa babies was highly likely sired by 3, 4, or even 5 different massive males. This is an incredibly aggressive and effective evolutionary strategy. By heavily diversifying the genetics of a single massive litter, the female actively ensured that at least some of her offspring inherited the exact genetic combinations needed to survive new diseases, abrupt environmental shifts, or specific swamp predators. Sperm storage also allowed the female to strategically delay fertilization until environmental conditions were absolutely perfect. If the wet season was late or large prey was scarce, she simply held the sperm internally. She waited to ovulate until her fat reserves were fully optimal to support a massive, multi-month pregnancy. This now brings us to how these titans actually got pregnant in the first place. The physical mechanics of massive snake mating are almost as intense and violent as the birth itself. If Titanoboa followed the reproductive behavior of modern anacondas, then the Cerrejón swamps hosted one of the most chaotic biological events imaginable: the mating ball. When a female anaconda is ready to mate, she releases a highly specific pheromone trail into the water and mud. Males pick up on this chemical scent from miles away and aggressively converge on her exact location. Because the female is drastically larger than the males, multiple males attempt to mate with her simultaneously. In green anacondas, for example, it is not uncommon to see up to a dozen males intricately coiled around a single massive female, forming a writhing, chaotic sphere of heavy muscle and scales that can last for weeks on end. Extrapolate that specific behavior to Titanoboa. Imagine a female 45 feet long and weighing 2,500 pounds, releasing powerful pheromones into the prehistoric river system. Days later, 5, 10, maybe 15 adult males would arrive. The males were likely significantly smaller than the females, perhaps only 25 to 30 feet long and weighing around 1,000 pounds each. They would wrap around her, violently fighting each other for physical leverage, pushing, squeezing, and crushing through the thick mud. Crazy. This may quickly create a massive mating ball of 10 to 15,000 pounds of pure contracting muscle. A writhing mass of prehistoric giant snakes would be so incredibly heavy it would collapse riverbanks, displace massive amounts of water, and crush small trees into splinters. The sheer kinetic energy and constant physical friction of this many giant cold-blooded animals sliding aggressively against each other in a 90-degree swamp would have generated a highly localized heat signature you could feel from yards away. These mating balls could have literally rolled through the shallow waters for weeks. The males wouldn't eat, the female wouldn't eat, they would be entirely focused on the intense genetic arms race taking place in the mud. Males possess pelvic spurs. These are small, claw-like remnants of prehistoric hind legs. They use these spurs to continuously scratch and stimulate the female during mating. Imagine dozens of giant spurs digging into the thick scales of a colossal female as the males jockey for position. Eventually, one or a few males would succeed in fertilizing her. The giant ball would disperse, and the exhausted males would vanish back into the deep swamps. The successful female would then begin the extraordinarily long, highly draining process of gestating her massive litter. She would find an optimal thermal spot in the deep swamp, settling in for her brutal half-year fast. Her massive body would act as a giant, armored biological incubator. The embryos would slowly pull heavy calcium and rich nutrients from their individual yolks, growing inch by inch in the dark, developing the exact same bone-crushing musculature as their mother. Every single detail of this reproductive cycle is an absolute masterclass in extreme biological adaptation. Titanoboa did not reach the staggering size of a school bus by sheer accident. It dominated its environment through pure brute force, but also through an incredibly efficient, highly successful reproductive strategy. By combining the internal incubation of live birth with massive litter sizes and exceptionally large neonates, Titanoboa successfully ensured that no matter how hostile or violent the Paleocene environment was, its genetic lineage would conquer. And hey, I'll catch you next time.